One of the most asked questions I get is how do I make the shelves in my game room, and in particular, how do I make the shelves for my VHS tapes, and since I'm going to make new ones, I thought I'd detail the process. This is the new area that I'm working on, and I wanted to give it a retro feel, so I'm going to have VHS tapes displayed on the right hand side. I'm going to measure the area that I have to work with and leave some space to be able to clear any molding or trim on the walls or door frame. I have to be sure the depth of my shelf does not stick out too far as to hit the hanging display piece. For clamshell tapes, I generally go with a 6.5 inch depth and 9.5 inch height per shelf to leave enough room to be able to pull out the tapes. Once I have all my measurements, I mark my pieces and start cutting. I generally use plywood and rip planks from it, but I had these boards and they'll serve nicely for the shelf build. On my table saw, I used a drop to set the depth of my cut, and then I set the width of the cut so the boards have that 6.5 inch depth I was looking for. I sand down the edges of the wood to clean it up and knock down any marks from the saw. It's tedious but necessary, especially if you plan on painting or staining your piece. Take the side pieces of my shelf and measure out where I want the brackets to go, and then I take the drop from my cuts and make sure that I have that 9.5 inch clearance I was looking for. Having all of this measured in advance makes it a lot easier to assemble the shelf. I used to do fancy joints, but I started using these brackets because it allows me to change the layout of the shelf later on should I want to rearrange it. Since this is going to be a floating shelf, I took a strip that was cut off from the table saw and pre-drilled mounting holes which we'll use to insert screws into our wall anchors. I made 2 of these. I then put wood glue on the strip and clamped it to the assembled shelf and pre-drilled holes to insert screws. This will help prevent the wood from cracking when we insert the screws. After having marked out the mounting points of the shelf onto the wall, I then insert wall anchors in the corresponding spots. The wall anchors I use are rated for 100 pounds, which is overkill for this project. I would recommend finding a spot where your studs are and sinking a screw into that. This part was hard to film, but all that's left is mounting a shelf to the wall by inserting the screws with the washer into your wall anchors. Now the fun part, filling up your shelves with dated media. I had this collection of Twilight Zone tapes just sitting on the floor for a while, so I'm glad I'm finally able to properly display it. Since this is the stairway leading up to my office / game room, I wanted you to feel like you're walking back in time as you're heading up the stairs. And I think between the 90s Taco Bell menus and the sign, and now all the VHS tapes, I think we're getting a lot closer to achieving that. So that's all I got. That's how the shelves are made. It's pretty easy. I still have more plans for in here, so maybe we'll have to do a part 2 later on.